Consider a very simple sentence. There's John. Okay? Or one of the earliest constructions that children learn is this construction. It is called the deictic locative construction. Deictic means you're pointing, like there or here, locative to a place, to a location, there. Now, the children learn this construction very, very early. You have, in English, for there, they learn da, and for father, they would say da da. So, da, da da is very early sentence. Now, it turns out that this is actually an extremely complicated construction. It is so complicated that from a certain point of view, from the point of view of generative linguistics, if you are a generative linguist, it is virtually impossible to describe this construction, and in fact, Chomsky's theory leaves it out. It is not described in Chomsky's theory because it cannot be. Let me explain why. Take a sentence like, there's John. Now, you can say a variant, there goes John. So you can have the verb be, there's John. The verb go, there goes John. Or you can say, here comes John. So three possibilities, three verbs, go, come, and be. You can also have a phrase at the end. There goes John with his jacket on. There's John sitting on the porch. Okay? So there's a final phrase like with his jacket on, sitting on the porch, drinking tea, whatever. Okay? Now, how do you negate that sentence? What is the negative form of there's John? You cannot negate it. You cannot say, there isn't John. Impossible. No negative. How do you question it? How do you say, what do you say? Is there John? Impossible. Right? You can't form a question. Right? How do you do what is called a tag construction on it? A tag construction is something like, John is sick, isn't he? Okay? Can you say, you cannot say, there's John, isn't there? Impossible. Or not even, there's John, isn't he? Impossible. So that can't be done. Now, these sentences like, here comes the bus, there's John, there goes Professor Lee. I mean, all of these sentences also cannot be embedded. So you cannot say something like, Bill believes that there's John. Or Bill believes that here comes the bus. Right? You can say Bill believes that the bus is coming. Bill believes that John is there. But not Bill believes that here comes the bus. Can't embed it. You can't embed it anywhere, not in a relative clause. You can't say, I know the man who there goes. Impossible. So, in general, this doesn't occur embedded except with a right verb. You can say things like, I'd like to point out to you that here comes the bus you're waiting for. I'd like to let you know that there is the man that you wanted to see. So, with a couple of verbs like point out, it is possible, but other verbs, impossible. Now, from the point of view of just syntax, which is the combination of symbols, it is extremely complicated to describe this distribution. But the distribution is actually very simple from the point of view of semantics. Think of what this sentence means. Okay? And think of why it is that a child, a very young child, can learn this sentence as one of the very first sentences that it learns. What you're doing when you say, "There's John," is you're pointing something out. You're pointing. And it's something, you're talking to someone who is seeing the same things you can see. So someone who is present right here, like you are. Right? There's John. And I'm pointing to a location, there. Or, here comes the bus. I point to some location. There goes Harry. And I name the person who's at that location, John. And what I'm doing is saying either that the person is stationary, there is John, or moving. Here comes the bus, there goes the bus. Okay, either away or from. Okay, those are the conditions of the sentence. And they're fairly simple conditions because we are constantly pointing to things that we see, pointing to locations, saying the name of what's in that location, very simple, pointing out whether something is moving or stationary, very simple conditions. So you can see why a child could learn this very, very easily. Now, why does this have the very strange syntax that it does? Think for a minute. Why can't you negate it? You say, "There's John." Why can't you have a negative? Because you can't point out something that's not there. You're pointing out something that is present already here. Right? You can't negate it if you're saying it's there, if that's the condition for the construction. So no negative. Why not a question? Because you're pointing it out. It's there. It's a positive thing. There's no question about it. Why not a tag, like isn't here? Because a tag expresses doubt, uncertainty. There's no uncertainty. It's right here. There's John. No uncertainty. Okay? Why don't you embed it in things like believe or expect? Because the meaning of pointing out is incompatible with the meaning of belief. That is, they don't quite fit together. It's not just believing that, it's saying it's really there. All right? However, you can embed it with the verb point out, because that's what you're doing. You're pointing it out. So it's actually very simple. This construction has a situational meaning called a pragmatic meaning. It tells you what you're doing with this construction. And that is normal. Constructions have a meaning. And what you're doing then determines what other things can combine with the construction. So this is a very important thing to understand, that there are constructions are not just sequences of syntactic categories or something like that. They're not just symbolic. They have meanings. And what they're doing is pairing that meaning with a certain form. You're saying that the location you're pointing to comes first. Why would the location come first? Because that's what you're pointing to. You're trying to get their attention to that location. Right? There's a reason even why the there is first. So this is something that you learn that's very important. From the earliest stages of childhood, constructions normally have semantic and pragmatic conditions associated with them. And what we want to say in cognitive linguistics is that a construction is actually a pairing of the meaning, that is the pragmatic and semantic meaning of the construction, with the form, the surface words, or the surface, categories of objects or whatever. So the claim here is that if you're going to specify a construction, you have two parts, a semantic part and a form part. The semantic part says, I'm pointing something out, I'm pointing at that there are certain elements of a construction. The elements are the speech act, pointing out, the thing you're pointing to, the person located there, and whether it's stationary or moving, and whether it's going or coming. That's it. Then the surface form says, first position, the location. Second position, the predicate. Third position, the entity you're pointing to. Fourth position, how you're describing it. That's it. But there's a correspondence between them, a pairing of the form with a meaning. Right? So a construction, from the point of view of cognitive linguistics, is such a pairing. Now, one of the questions we had this morning becomes relevant here. When you pair a form with a meaning in a neural system, you have to have neural connections going both ways. So you need to have something that goes in one direction and the other direction, and then you need a little circuit, neural circuit, that controls the flow of activation in one way or the other. And you need that for each element, for the there part, for the go part, for the John part, for the description part. For each element you're going to need some pairing. And then you need another element that makes them all into one construction, that unifies them. And that is something that says, if it is activated, the whole construction is activated. And if a part of the construction is activated, it is activated. Okay? So it's something that, it's a little neural circuit that tells you these pieces that are connected to each other, again, form a unit. Okay? That's the kind of structure that you need, and in our group we model exactly those structures, and we can do neural computation over those structures and then describe them quite precisely. So what this says is that syntax lies in those little parts in the middle, the circuits that control the flow, and in the circuits that tell you how these are unified. That syntax is not autonomous. It doesn't occur by itself. Syntax is secondary. It's a pairing of meaning and form. And meaning is grounded in the body, and form is grounded in the body. That is, phonological form has to do with what you say and what you hear, which is embodied. So form is embodied, meaning is embodied, and syntax depends upon these two embodied things. And what you're doing is, syntax is a secondary construction of these pairings. Okay? So in a cognitive grammar, that is how we understand what syntax is and how it fits into a neural theory. Now, one of the most interesting things about the deictic there construction is that it has a great many variations. And let me try to give you some sense of all the variations that it has. The reason I'm mentioning this is echoing. Let's look at cases like this. Nope. Yeah. Suppose I say a sentence, suppose a little sound goes off. Thank you. I can say, there's the beep. Right on cue. Okay? There's the beep. Now, I suppose I know that that sound is going to come off in a second. Just before it, I can say, here comes the beep. Ba-da, ba-da. Okay, you get it. Okay, so you can do this with sounds. Now, and you can, okay, notice what you cannot do. With John, you can say, John is there. With the beep, you can't say, the beep is there. You can say, there's the beep, but not the beep is there. Why not? What is going on that allows this to happen? In the simple sentence, that John is there, you're just talking about location. But sounds are not just in a location. Right? Sounds are things you hear. They're not physical things in space. So you can't say the beep is there. Okay? Now, why could you say, here comes the beep. There's the beep. There goes the beep. Okay? This is a variant on the construction, on the deictic there construction. And it's a variant that is a very minor variant. In this variant, you're understanding perceptual space as physical space, and percepts as entities, things you hear as entities. And you're understanding that something that is about to come into existence, about to be realized, is distal. There comes the beep, and so on. And something that is realized is distal. Something soon to be realized is proximal, meaning here. And there's a general metaphor that activation is motion. Okay? Activation is motion. This occurs in many, many cases. A very common metaphor. And what happens is that these metaphors allow you to extend the construction from here comes Harry to here comes the beep. But that's a special construction. That is a different construction than Harry is there. Totally different construction. Harry is there, doesn't, you can say Harry isn't there, is Harry there? Totally different constraints. This deictic locative, where you're pointing something out, it gets extended via metaphors that the simple construction does not get extended by. And that's an interesting fact. It can be extended, that one can be extended, the other cannot be. And notice what this means. It means constructions have an existence as separate entities. Some people might say, well, this construction is just a version of the other one with a rule that moves it there to front or something. But that can't be. Okay? All right? It's got to be a separate entity because this construction gets extended, the other one does not. Okay? Now, why is that important? In a traditional generative grammar, there are no constructions as entities. There are rules, and they just generate, lots and lots of examples of constructions, but the constructions are not separate things, they're just whatever is generated by the rules. So for Chomsky, constructions are what he calls epiphenomena. The real things are the rules, and they just generate the constructions freely, but the constructions have no are not units of their own. But here we see that the construction must be an entity on its own. Right? You must be able to distinguish one from another. They don't extend in the same way. Okay. Now, there are other examples of this perceptual deictic. Take something like, there goes the alarm clock. Alarm clock goes off, there goes the alarm clock. Or suppose you regularly get a pain in your knee. Your knee starts to hurt and you say, oh, there goes the pain in my knee. You're perceiving the pain. Now, notice that you can say things like, with here comes the beep with sound, but if the alarm clock is about to go off, you cannot say, here comes the alarm clock. If it goes off, you say, there goes the alarm clock, but you cannot say, here comes the alarm clock. Okay? And you cannot say, here comes the pain in my knee, as you begin to feel it. Okay? Why can't you do this? Right? That is, there's a special condition on this that has to do with metonymy. When I say the alarm clock, there goes the alarm clock, I'm using a metonymy of the clock standing for the sound of the clock. The beep is a sound. But the alarm clock isn't a sound, it's an object. When I say, there goes the alarm clock, what I mean is, there goes the sound of the alarm clock, the alarm. Okay? When I say, there goes my knee, I mean, there goes the pain in my knee. That's what I'm perceiving, the pain, not the knee. So, when there is you can say, here comes the pain in my knee, but you cannot say, here comes my knee. You cannot use this construction with a metonymy. And that's a special constraint on this construction. Okay? Now, and notice, in the normal construction, you couldn't say it at all. You can't say, my knee goes there, the pain in my knee goes there, or impossible. You can't say any of those things at all. So what we find is that variations on a construction can have special constraints that are unique to that construction. Okay? But now, what is a variation on a construction? Right? What does it mean? In transformational grammar, people used to try to do variations on constructions by taking one construction and then trying to transform it into the other. But that's not what's happening here. The syntax is pretty much the same, but the constraints on the meaning are different. Okay? What you're doing with this variant is the following. You are inheriting as much as you can from the central construction, as in there's Harry, with special constraints. Add the metaphor that a percept, something perceived, is an object, okay, which we saw in the other metaphors for the mind, where you're perceiving things that are objects and playing with them and so on. Add that metaphor and allow the metonymy only under certain conditions, okay, usually, but don't allow the metonymy with here coming in this direction. Okay, you have those conditions, and then you activate everything else. Okay, well, how do you do that? That's a little strange. But it's not strange in a neural theory of grammar. And here's why. When you say activate everything else, you mean activate everything that is consistent with the conditions you've just stated. and don't activate anything inconsistent with it. Well, what is an inconsistency? Inconsistency, from the neural perspective, is mutual inhibition. That is, neurally, the activation of one inhibits the activation of the other. Okay? So what this says is that you can specify the variant of a construction by saying, here are the special conditions on this construction, and otherwise take everything else from the central construction. And when you do that, you activate as much as possible in the central construction except the parts that are inconsistent with the special case, because they are mutually exclusive. If these are active, the other can't be. Everything else is allowed to be activated. So what you have now is a maximally simple theory of what constructional variation is. It says, when you have a variant of a construction, you have a construction, you have the conditions that differ, and you have something neurally activating the construction that allows you to activate as much as possible, and the differences are mutually inhibitory. Okay? And that says this is a natural thing to happen. Why? You have a construction. If you want to extend it, all you need to do is add a couple of extra conditions, like 2 or 3 extra conditions, and you extend it completely naturally. Well, it turns out that for the deictic construction, there are 10 extensions. There are 10 different variants on this construction. It is widely extended. And let me try to give you some sense of the kinds of extensions that there are. So, there's one in discourse. We're listening to a lecture, and I say to you, now there's a good point. All right? That was a good example. There's a good example. Okay? I can be pointing to something in language, not an object, not a percept, but something in a discourse. Okay? And I can say, if I anticipate the lecture, I can say, now here comes the best part. Here comes the best part. Listen carefully. And then the lecturer says it, and at this point, I cannot say, there goes a nice point, or there goes the best part. Impossible. Why? Okay? What you have in the metaphor in discourse is you're understanding discourse. Think about how we understand discourse. We understand discourse that is about to happen as in terms of objects that are coming to us. Right? I'm speaking. In the future, I'm going to be saying some other things, and you understand that as objects coming toward us via the metaphor of time is a moving object. Right? Now, as it moves and it's being formulated, it goes. You say it, and then it's gone. It's not in the past. It's not over there. It's gone. And that's why you can't say, there goes a nice point, because it doesn't exist anymore. But here it comes, you're anticipating that the speaker has already formulated it. Okay? So it's existing, it's coming, but after it is here, it doesn't exist. It's something you know about discourse. So, therefore, you can't say, there goes a nice point. Okay? So, what you need to extend the construction is the metaphor that discourse, elements of a discourse, are objects moving towards you. Elements that you hear are objects that are present here. There's a nice point. And then they go out of existence. Okay? And notice the metaphor coming into and going out of existence. Now, there are other deictics. One of them is that's important is what I call the activity start deictic. That is, this is something you can say when somebody who does some regular activity starts doing it again. So, there he goes doing Tai Chi again. Okay? So, notice that there he goes doing it. He's not moving, or there he goes meditating again. He's just sitting there. No motion. Right? But he's in an activity. Remember the metaphor, activities are motions. Okay? There he goes. That's why it's going. Okay? So this metaphor can extend the construction, again, in a new direction. Okay. Now, and you can also get sentences like, here we go again. Okay? Again, extending the construction. Now, let's see. One of my favorites is this. Imagine that you go to get some soup. And you order soup, and they come and they say, here's your soup, piping hot. Okay? This is what we call the delivery deictic. It said, and there used to be a TV show with Johnny Carson, and the other guy used to say, here's Johnny, right, when he brought him on. And you can say in English, here's your soup, with a long E. Now, that's the only place you get that long E. Here, right? You can't say, John is here. Impossible. You can't say, here comes the bus. Impossible. But here's your pizza. Fine. When you're delivering something, you can say that. Now, what's interesting about this is the following. You cannot say, suppose they take your pizza away, you can't say, there goes your pizza. But here's your pizza upon delivery. There's a delivery frame where someone is delivering something to you. Here's your package. All right? When it's delivered and you fit that frame, then you get this long vowel, and it only works with here because you're presenting it here. Okay? So that the conditions of the frame, when added to the central construction, change the construction in a minimal way, use the rest of it, and then add extra conditions. And it's very simple to describe the conditions under which that long vowel occurs. You're delivering something. Okay? Now, there are other cases as well, and I won't go through the exact details of them, but let me give you some examples. You can say something like, now, suppose you're talking about your favorite baseball player who is now retired, and you talk about the old days when you went to see this baseball player. You can say, now there was a great shortstop, right? And you say it with a special use of the vowel, there, with awe. There, breathy. Now, there was a shortstop. You can't say, there's John, or here comes the bus, right? Impossible. But when you're expressing awe, you go, oh, right? You have this breathy voice, you can add the breathiness to there. And then the there refers back in time because you're talking about something previous. Okay? Now if it's something, okay. So you have a very, very special condition. Or you can say now, here is a great cup of coffee. Right? Here. So, and notice, I mean, you can't use it in the other constructions. For example, suppose you see a movie of your favorite shortstop making a great play, you can't say, now there went a great shortstop, right? There was. It only goes with be. It doesn't go with go. Okay? Because you're expressing awe at this person's existence, right? It's a different constraint. There's another one that has to do with annoyance. You can say, there they go, making fools of themselves again. There they go, right? There they go, timing it. You're exasperating it. There they go, making fools of themselves again. Certain rhythm, okay, that goes with this. Now, and you can say it of us, here we go, making fools of ourselves again. But not here they go, making fools of themselves. That is, there are special conditions having to do with phonology and semantics that go with this construction. They use the rest of it and they go on. Okay, I can continue. There's a lot more in this book of variations on the construction. But one of the general point is simple. First, constructions are pairings of semantics and phonology, and those pairings have to have neural elements linking, circuits that allow the governing flow between semantics and phonology, and then something unifying all of those elements in the middle. The grammar is that pairing and that structure, and then you can get variations on it. And in a neural theory, you just need to specify what the variations are and then activate the construction, and everything works. Now, let us consider a different construction of English, one that is generally discussed. It's a different there construction. This is the existential there construction, and that is the one that's usually discussed. There's a fly on the wall. Okay? There's a car in the backyard. Right? Something like that. Now notice the differences. The first deictic there construction has stress on there. There is Harry. There goes Harry. And you can have here. Here comes Harry. You can't have here in this construction, and there's no stress. There's a fly on the wall. In the other construction, you have something definite, something specific. There's Harry. You know, there's the beep. It's definite and specific. Here you have something that's indefinite and not specific. Namely, there's a bird on the roof. There's a boy on the porch. And it doesn't say which it is. It's unspecified and indefinite. So those are the constraints. And then you can have descriptive phrases like, there's a boy on the porch wearing a red hat. Yeah, that same kind of thing at the end. Now, how are these constructions learned? What is the difference in the learning of the deictic construction and the existential construction, and are they related? Christopher Johnson, who did the work on the learning of metaphor, in his dissertation, also studied the learning of these constructions. And he discovered something extremely interesting. In every one of the protocols of child language he looked at, the constructions were learned in a very interesting way. They were learned in cases where they came together, where there were cases where you couldn't tell one from the other. And that is a case where you're both pointing something out and saying it exists. You can do both at once. Okay? So you're both pointing it out, so you can say, you can use an indefinite article like and you don't know if it's specific or not. It's vague. So, there's a fly on your nose. And it could be, there's a fly on your nose, or there's a fly on your nose. You're both pointing it out and saying it exists at the same time. Okay? But they mean different things, but there are two interpretations of the words. And if you slur it so that you can't tell the difference, whether it's stressed or unstressed, it's in between, then you have something that can be interpreted either way. And it seems that these are learned in those situations where you're both pointing something out and saying it exists, which are common enough, especially with children. With children, saying it exists and pointing it out are commonly go together. So, what he's saying is that we base the existential on the deictic. Okay? Now, if that's the case, something interesting is happening. Because with the existential, you're just saying it exists, but you're not pointing it out. You're pointing it out in the other construction, but with the existential, you're just saying it exists. And it, therefore, doesn't have a stressed vowel on there because you're not pointing to anything. Okay? So you have a sentence like, there's a fly on your nose. Okay? What are the syntactic constraints? None. You can say, negate it, there isn't a fly on your nose. You can question it. Is there a fly on your nose? You can put a tag on. There's a fly on your nose, isn't there? You can embed it. Bill believes that there's a fly on your nose, and so on. No constraints at all. Why? Because the pragmatic constraint of pointing something out is not on this construction. All you're doing is saying it exists. And its meaning has no constraints to rule out negatives, questions, tags, and so on. So you can do anything with it. Now, what this says is, in terms of a grammar, that you can understand the structure of an existential as a variant of the deictic that has dropped the conditions on pointing out and added the condition on existence. And when you add the condition on existence, you only get the verb be. Okay? And if you only get the verb be, you only get the deictic locative, you only get the locative there. You don't get here, because here goes with come. So you only get there. So what this says is that if you think about this in terms of acquisition, and you think about it the way it would be organized relative to your brain, because of the way it's acquired, then you can see that the existential construction as a variant of the deictic construction, which just says, change the conditions. Don't have this condition. Have this other condition. Okay? Now, this is quite remarkable because the older construction, the one you learned first, is very constrained, and the one it's based on that adds conditions has fewer constraints. It doesn't just add conditions, it changes conditions by removing pragmatic constraints. So it's relatively unconstrained. It is free. The other one has weird conditions, syntactic conditions, because it has pragmatic conditions. So you get a very different theory about the organization of a grammar. It says a grammar can be organized with variants on constructions. Right? It's a very different theory of how grammars can be structured. Now, one of the interesting things about the existential their constructions is that they also have variants. There are 4 variants on them. Let me try to give you some sense of those variants. Let's see. Yeah. Trying to remember all of these. Okay. One variant is has to do with presentation, beginning something when you're starting off. And in that case, you can have the following kind of sentence. Once upon a time, there lived in a kingdom far away an old man. Lived. There you can get a different verb, not was, but lived. Once upon a time, there was living on the top of a mountain an old woman. And you get was living and a locational, and then the subject at the end. So when you are beginning a discourse, you can get that variation on the there constructions, on the existential there. It's the discourse starting case. Okay? So that's one variation. Now, there's a different variation that's kind of interesting, and that is when you are reminding people of things, or reminding yourself. You can say, who can we get to go to the movies with us? Well, there's Harry, or there's always Harry, right? And then you can have, with reminders, something specific, like Harry, as opposed to something unspecific like a dog or a man. So in those cases, you can have specifics, and you can have specifics in one more case, lists. What do I have to do today? Well, there's the cat to feed, there's dinner to buy, there's, etc. There's a whole long list of things to do, and that is a variant on the existential there construction, but it's a special case. It has the framework of sort of reminding yourself what you have to do or what there is, and when you're doing that, you have specific things, definites, the cat to feed, the cat, okay, and that overrides the condition on indefinites, okay. So again, you can have a variation, keep everything except the special conditions. Now, there's another really interesting one, which is what I call the strange existential. Okay, the normal existential says there's something like, "There's a man outside," but or "There's been a man shot." Okay. There's been a man shot, where a man goes after the form be. There has been a man shot. But the strange existential is, there's a man been shot. So let me write those down. normal. Strange. Okay, there's a man been shot. Now, what's interesting about this is usually a man goes after the verb to be. The subject always follows the verb to be. But here, it's following something that looks like the verb to be reduced, but it isn't. It's the verb has. There's a man been shot, hasn't there, not there's a man been shot, isn't there. The tag shows you that this apostrophe S comes from has, not from is. You can't say there is a man been shot. So what is the difference? The difference is the following. That in the strange existential, the second element is the have of the perfect, and the phonological condition is that it must be reduced to look like the form of be, like what is would be. Okay? That's the phonological condition. Otherwise, it's just like the other. But it has two different conditions, and then it inherits the rest of the structure. So here you have a set of 4 or 5 different existential constructions, minimally different from the central case. But you can't derive them by grammatical transformation or anything like that. What you have are different pairings of semantics and phonology. And you get a new pairing of form and meaning that tells you this is the variation, and then it points to a construction, activates that construction, and says take everything there that's consistent with these conditions. Okay? That's how grammars are really organized. They're not organized around transformations or anything like that. They're organized around constructions, pairings of form and meanings, and variations on constructions. Okay? So we could go on and go do construction after construction and so on. But I wanted to give you a rich example, a rich case that indicates, first of all, how grammars are constructed, but also, now that we know something about the neural theory of grammar and how the neural system works, why they should be constructed this way. Because given the neural system, it's easy to form variations of this sort. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is stop there on syntax. We can do lots more with syntax. But the general idea in syntax is this. Syntax is secondary. It has not primary. What's primary is in grammar is the embodied parts, embodied semantics and embodied phonology. Syntax has to do with the pairing of the semantics and the phonology and the structure, the neural structure that permits that pairing, that permits the flow between the semantics and the phonology. Okay? That's what a construction is, and the syntax is in that, in what permits that flow. Then, once you have that, you can form variations on it by having other pairings, minimal pairings of other conditions that activate the central construction and then therefore take everything consistent with what is left. And that's how grammars get constructed. And that's how they get built up, and that's the structure that they have in your brain. Okay? Very different from anything like a generative theory. Okay, so let's stop with grammar for a while and take up another topic. The topic of blending and mental spaces. Okay? Now, the subject of mental spaces came about because of a number of classic problems in logic. They were problems like the following. You could say something like, in 1947, the president was a baby. Right? Now, that's ambiguous. It could mean we elected a 2-year-old president, or the person who is now president was 2 years old at that time. Okay? Now, in 1947, the president was a baby. Now, how do we make sense of that? We have a single sentence, the president was a baby. Right? But that sentence, the president is a baby, is not true at any point in time. Right? What you're doing is saying there's a previous point in time in which the predicate is a baby holds of someone. And that someone today can be described as the president. So you're looking at the world at two different stages, in the past and in the present. Two different, what Fauconnier calls mental spaces. Okay? There's a place where the mayor and the police chief are the same person. There are two roles, mayor and police chief, and they point to the same person. And what Fauconnier did in his book Mental Spaces was give a general theory of how these cases worked. That is, he said, look, you have certain things we call mental spaces, whatever they are. He didn't say what they are. Let's represent them by circles. You have entities, and in a mental space, you can have an entity, let's call this X, and you can have a predicate, is a baby, which holds in this space, and you can have an entity X prime over here, where this X prime is president, and you can have a connector between them. Okay? And when you say what constructs this is in 1947, that tells you the difference between this and the present. Okay? So what Fauconnier said was something very minimal. He didn't tell you what mental spaces are. He didn't say, here's a theory of what they are. He said, any theory of what they are has to meet these conditions. Here are the basic conditions on a theory of mental spaces, and if you want to go further, whatever they are, they have to meet these conditions. You have to have at least this kind of information. Okay, that's what he was saying in that book. And then he goes through chapter after chapter with more and more complicated examples. So you can have a movie, and in the movie, Elizabeth Taylor plays Cleopatra. Okay? And in the movie, Cleopatra marries Richard Burton. Well, Cleopatra and Richard Burton don't exist in the same world, but it's Cleopatra in the world of the movie and Richard Burton playing Julius Caesar or Mark Antony in the other world. Okay. You get the idea. Now, so That's the basic idea behind mental spaces. What is a neural theory of mental spaces? Think about first a neural theory of a single mental space. It has to do with a neural simulation. We went through that before. We said, look, we have something like Harry grasped the bottle. Okay? You have a simulation of Harry, a simulation of grasping, and a simulation of the bottle, where the patient of grasping is bound to the bottle, and the agent is bound to Harry. Okay? And you can do neural simulation of that. What does that mean? It means there's a bunch of neurons in some various parts of the brain that are simulating the imagination of this. Now, what about mental spaces? It's something similar. It says there are two groups of neurons in different places which can simulate these different things and the relations between them. Okay? So the theory of neural simulation says, look, if you have different spaces, what you're doing is using neurons in somewhat different parts of the brain, somewhat related parts of the brain, to then activate notions like is president or is a baby, and the relations between them, between these different places. Now, that is now being programmed. We're now working out the actual neural modeling of the theory of mental spaces. It is not finished yet. So when it's finished, it'll be written up, and you can see the actual details of what has to be the case there. But that's the general idea behind this. Now, what about conceptual blends? Conceptual blends are bindings. We've talked about bindings. I gave you one example. Let me give you a number of examples of bindings. I gave you the example of the blue chair, where you're binding the blueness to the chair to get a single object. Binding also occurs in pronominalization. John came into the room and he took off his coat. You're binding he to John, the referent of he to the referent of John, so they're the same person. Okay? That's another kind of binding. We saw binding when you put metaphors together. So we had before the metaphor of persisting over time is standing erect, and organizational structure is physical structure. And then we bound together organizational structure and persisting over time, and physical structure and standing erect. And we got the metaphor, the complex metaphor, organizational structure that persists over time is a physical structure that stands erect, which can be either a society or a theory is a building. Now, when you do that, you are forming a blend of two metaphors. It's binding together two metaphors to form a blended metaphor. When you do this, so these blends happen all the time. And you can bind together metonymies and metaphors of all sorts, especially in mythology or fiction or poetry. You can get very, very complex blends. For example, in Western mythology, European mythology, there is a figure called the Grim Reaper. Now, the Grim Reaper is this guy who is a skeleton. The skeleton comes dressed in a monk's hood and cowl, black. He has a scythe that you use to cut down wheat. He comes to the door. You open the door and you say, uh-oh, I'm gone. I'm out of here. I have to go with this guy, and he takes you away. Okay? And that's usually before you're ready to die. It's not when you're on your deathbed about to die. It's when you're perfectly healthy, perfectly nice. This guy shows up and you say, gotta go, bye. Okay. Now, what is going on with the Grim Reaper? Why does the Grim Reaper look like that? Why does he have a scythe? Why do you have to go away? Why does he have this cowl on? Why is he a skeleton? Right? What is going on? Here's why. First, there are two metonymies. Why a skeleton? A skeleton is what you become after you die. So the skeleton stands for death. So it's a metonymy of what you become after you die for death. The skeleton is taking you away. Why the monk's cowl? This appeared in the Middle Ages, and at that time, monks dressed in black presided over funerals. Okay? So the guy presiding over the funeral has come to the door for you. Okay? Why the scythe? Why has he got this big blade in his hand? What do you use it for? You use it for cutting down wheat. Right? There's a metaphor that people are plants. And that they sprout out when they're young, and that then when they're, vigorous young people, they're full grown, and then they decline. Okay? Now, when do you harvest the wheat? When it's fully developed and full grown, you cut it down. This guy is cutting you down in the prime of your life. Right? People are plants, you're being cut down. Death. Why do you have to go? Because death is departure. We say, he's gone, we've lost him, he's gone away, the dear departed, and so on. You are binding together two metonymies and two metaphors into one figure in mythology. And this is very common. Happens all the time in poetry, novels, myths, and so on. Right? So what you're doing is binding, and the result is called a blend. Okay? What other kinds of blends are there? Well, all sorts. Mark Turner gives a very nice example from Dante. There's a figure in Dante, Bertrand de Born, who goes around, his head is cut off. He is holding his bloody head by his arm, by its hair, and the head speaks to you. And the head is in hell, and forever he's got to go around holding his head. And his head speaks to you and explains to you why he has this horrible punishment. Okay? Here's why. Bertrand de Born did some bad things. What did he do that was so bad? Well, he was a British nobleman, and he convinced the son of the king to overthrow the king and kill the king. Okay? Now, in England, this was bad in medieval England. Right? Today we might say hooray, but then it was bad. Right? And why? And why does he have his head cut off? Because the king is the head of state, metaphorically, and he was responsible for removing the head of state. And the father is the head of the family, and he was responsible for removing the head of the family. So his punishment is that his head should be removed. It's only fair, balanced. Okay? There's moral accounting. You balance things. We'll talk about moral accounting later. Okay? So what is going on there? You have a figure of Bertrand de Born in which two metaphors are coming together with the idea of moral accounting. That is, what's moral is having done to you what you did to somebody else. Okay? But what you did to someone else was metaphorical. So it's via these two metaphors that you get the figure of Bertrand de Born. Okay? That's a blend. You're putting them together. Now, there are all sorts of other blends, and they occur all over the place. They occur in advertising. One of my favorite ads is an ad to support, it's a public service ad in America to support education. And you have a guy who's in the operating room of a hospital. He's lying there under the sheet. He's looking up, and there are 3 children who are about 8 years old there, dressed as doctors. And they say, it says, little Mark, little Janie, and little Mary will be your surgeons today. Okay? Saying, if you don't educate them, you better watch out because soon they'll be operating on you. They better be educated well. Okay? That is, this is a picture that would not happen. It's a blend that doesn't happen. You have the children at a young age, before they become doctors, being doctors. Right? That is, the children will later, you're combining a future mental space and a present mental space, and you're blending them. Okay? Ads like this are extremely, extremely common. They're blends. So, what are the basic idea? We find these everywhere. I mean, there are Fauconnier and Turner have a big, thick 500-page book with blend after blend after blend. Shorna Colson has another 500-page book with hundreds of blends. I mean, they're constantly there. And the point of them is that given the notion of binding, neural binding, given metaphors, given frames, given metonymies, you can blend them together. You can do bindings. And we do them all the time, easily. We understand them regularly. Okay? And we reason with them. So that's how blends work. That's how blends fit in. Blends are normal. We read fairy tales, we don't even notice that they're blends. Okay? Now, in mathematics, there are blends. We have a metaphor I mentioned this morning in mathematics of the number line. Okay, here's the number line. This point is 0. This point is 1. This point is 2. This point is 3, and so on. In this, numbers, metaphorically, are points on a line. They could just be numbers, but there's a metaphor. The numbers are points on a line. And with that metaphor, we blend the source and target domains. And then this over here is both a point and a number, simultaneously. Both a point and a number in the number line. Okay? You've got a blend. And we have lots and lots and lots of blends. Mathematics gives us many, many, many blends. Okay, I could give you more examples. Want another example from mathematics? All right, here's a nice example from trigonometry. This will explain to you, there's a basic metaphor for trigonometry that's based on a blend. And in case you never understood trigonometry, in 5 minutes you will. Okay?
Hi.
Okay. In geometry, we have the concept of circle. A circle has a circumference, a center, and a radius. Okay? That's in geometry. Okay? We also have number lines like this, 0, 1, 2, 3, which is a blend. And given number lines, we can form a plane, the Cartesian plane, that has point here 0, 0, where this is 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. And this is -1, -2. But here we have -1, here we have 1, and so on. Let's make this a little bit bigger. That's like 1 is over here, -1 is over here, 1 is over here, and -1 is here. Okay? So that's the number line. That is the Cartesian plane in geometry. Now, what we can do is we can put these together and we can draw a unit, form a blend that goes like this. We put a circle right here where this goes through the point 1. And it says the radius is length 1. That's why it's a unit circle. And now we have a circle with a center at 0, 0, and a circumference here, and this distance 1. That's a blend of a circle and Cartesian plane. Now we take another blend. Let's take an angle. Call this angle theta. Okay? And let's put that angle right there. This is now theta. Okay? Now, let's take a right triangle like this. And let's put this right triangle right here. That forms another blend. We now have a blend of 4 elements: the circle, the Cartesian plane, the angle, and the right triangle. Okay? That's a blend. You just put them together. Now, what is trigonometry about? Trigonometry is the study of how to do arithmetic with angles. For example, you might want to add angles. You have 2 angles. Here's an angle, here's an angle. You want to add them. You'd like to do that and get the new angle. But you might want to subtract angles, or multiply angles, or divide angles, or raise angles to powers. How could you do that? Because angles occur in plane geometry where there's no numbers. If you're going to add them, they have to be numbers. If you're going to subtract them, angles have to be numbers. But angles in geometry are not numbers. So somehow you've got to get them to be numbers. And that is a job for metaphor. So you construct the basic metaphor of trigonometry. And you do this by taking this blend and noticing certain things. You notice that as this angle gets bigger, this line gets longer. Right? It gets bigger, it gets longer. And when this angle hits 90 degrees, this line has a length pi over 2. When it hits 180 degrees, it has a length pi. comes around to 360, it has a length 2 pi, and so on, because the circumference is 2 pi. So, given that, we know that, let's say, a 45-degree angle here is pi over 4. It has a number. There's a correlation between angles and numbers, namely the lengths of this line. So we construct a metaphor, and the metaphor says the angle is the length of the line. It is the length of this arc, and that makes the angle into a number. And then you can add angles, subtract angles, raise them to powers, multiply them, do whatever you want. And that's called trigonometry. You now understand what trigonometry is. It took less than 5 minutes to explain it. Now, of course, doing it is another matter. But you understand now what it's about. And the mechanism is blending plus metaphor. You form this blend, and then on the basis of the blend, you construct a metaphor. The blending is just binding these structures together. Okay? So that gives you a feel for what blending is. It's a very powerful device, and we use it all the time. It's very, very, very common. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do to finish up is to talk about something I'm going to talk about at Beijing University later this week. And that is politics. And, but here I want to talk just about one part of that. And that has to do with what I will call deep metaphor. Now, deep metaphor is, as you would expect, not obvious. And what a deep metaphor does is structure an entire worldview, structures how you understand the world. And it's not obvious, and then other metaphors fit the deep metaphors. Okay? So let me give you examples of this. One of the things I've studied in a book called Moral Politics, which I will write here, in that book, I asked the following question. What is the difference in American politics? This might be very, very different from Chinese politics. I don't pretend to know anything about Chinese politics. Right? But in American politics, there is a difference between liberals and conservatives. And right now, it's a very tricky difference because about half the country is liberal and the other half is conservative. And in the current projections for the elections coming up, it is about 45 or 46% on each side. It's very, very close. Okay? In the last election, Gore got the most votes, but the Supreme Court chose Bush on their certain constitutional strange grounds. But Bush supposedly won by 500 votes out of 100 million cast. Okay? That's how close the division in America is. In America, liberals and conservatives cannot even talk to each other. They can't understand each other. They have TV programs where they just yell at each other, and neither understands the other. It's just lots of yelling back and forth as if but no contact made. Okay? So the question I asked myself is, what is the difference in terms of cognition? How does this work? And I asked it in a particular way. I said, okay, if you're going to ask this question, you have to have certain problems that you have to solve. So let's think of, the kinds of problems that you would have to solve. What sort of data matter here? And what I found was this. I said, look, first, I started this back in 1994, about 10 years ago. there was a major election when the conservatives took over the government. And in that election, the conservatives made a pledge to do 10 things. It was called the Contract with America. And the 10 things were, the conservatives were going to outlaw all abortions. No more abortion anywhere allowed, even if whether you wanted it or not, no abortion. They were also going to change the tax rate so that rich people paid a lot less. Okay? And it was called the flat tax. It used to be a progressive tax where very rich people paid more taxes than poorer people. But now they're going to say they paid the same rate, which meant a lot less taxes. Okay? So they're going to have a flat tax. And I asked myself, what does abortion have to do with the flat tax? Strange question. Now, the other thing that they pledged was that they would guarantee that every American could own any kind of guns they wanted, including machine guns. That is, they would get rid of laws against gun control, controlling the ownership of guns. So I said, what does the flat tax and abortion have to do with the ownership of guns? Okay? And then they had something that said, we're going to have, it was called tort reform. Let me explain what that means. It means in America, if a corporation does something irresponsible, like suppose that it makes a car that will, where the gas tank will blow up under certain conditions, and it knows this, and it doesn't care, and the gas tanks blow up and a certain number of people are killed, in America it's possible for the relatives of those people to sue. They wanted to say that let's not allow that, or at least allow, not have very high payments. Let's make very low payments for any suits of this sort. That's what's called tort reform. That is, limit to a very small amount the payments for injury from irresponsible or evil corporations, okay, in lawsuits. What does that have to do with the flat tax, abortion, guns, and so on? And so on. They had lots and lots of these different proposals. Now, I couldn't figure out what they had to do with each other. So I said to myself, look, I believe exactly the opposite of each of these things. What do my beliefs have to do with each other? And I couldn't figure that out either. Okay? So then I said, okay, I'm going to worry about this. And I looked at another mystery. One of the big things going on in the electoral campaigns in 1992 and 1994 in America, the conservatives were arguing about what they called family values. And they were talking about what traditional American families of a certain sort would believe. And that was what the elections were supposed to be about. And I said, why would family values matter in national elections where there are issues of war and peace and atom bombs and pollution and global warming? Why family values? And I discovered, as I was looking at this, I remembered an old paper that one of my students had written about a metaphor. And the metaphor was that the nation is a family. After all, you understand large social groups in terms of smaller social groups, especially families and communities, so on. And this is a metaphor that all Americans have. We speak of our founding fathers. When we have a war, we send our sons and daughters to war, and so on. Now, and I assume this is probably there in China as well. The nation is understood, at least in America, as a family. Now, if you have two different understandings of the nation, I reasoned, maybe you have two different kinds of families that are being understood. So what I did was I took the politics, I set up the metaphor as a mapping, and I mapped backwards. And out came two different models of the family. I will call them the strict father family and nurturant parent. Right? The strict father family goes with conservatism. The nurturant parent family goes with liberalism in politics. And most conservatives view this as the ideal kind of family, and most liberals view this as view nurturance as the ideal kind of family. So what I then did was work out the details, and in this book there are 500 pages of details showing that every single proposal of a conservative or liberal kind is a consequence of these metaphors. Okay? Now, I won't get a chance to go through it all today, but I want to give you a feel for this. A strict father family works like this. In America, this is about America. Don't know anything about China. But here's how it works in America. In a strict father family, the father is the leader of the family, and it is assumed that the world is a difficult and dangerous place, that the world is competitive and always will be, that there's evil out there in the world, and that children are born bad and have to be made good. And you need a strict father to protect the family, to support the family, to compete with other people in the world successfully, and to teach his children right from wrong. And it's assumed that there's an absolute right and an absolute wrong, and the strict father knows what's right and what's wrong. Furthermore, the only way that the strict father can teach his children what's right is to punish them when they do wrong, and the punishment must be painful. It must hurt. And the idea is that if you punish them physically when they're young, that is, and the name for this is physical discipline. If you give them physical discipline when they're young, then they will get mental discipline. They will learn to do what's right and wrong. They will control themselves, discipline themselves. And that's the only way that they will become moral people. So that physical punishment is an act of love. It shows you love your child if you punish them physically when they do wrong. And there's a name for this. The word is tough love, which is an expression used by conservatives. Tough love. Now, there's another part of this. That discipline that you get from being punished physically when you do wrong, when you actually, and there are certain books on this that tell you how hard you should hit and what kind of sticks you can use and so on. That discipline is supposed to do something else for you. That is, if you're a disciplined person and you pursue your self-interest, you can become wealthy and self-reliant. So that there's a connection between prosperity and morality. If you're disciplined enough, the assumption is in America there is so much opportunity to make money that all you need is the discipline to do it, and then you'll be able to become self-reliant, make enough money to take care of yourself. Right? And if you're not disciplined, then you won't be able to be moral, you won't be able to follow the rules and do what's right, and if you're not disciplined, you won't be able to make a living and you will be dependent on other people. So lack of discipline is seen therefore as immorality, and there's a link between poverty and immorality. As there's a link between prosperity and morality. Now, there's a further part of this model that by the time a child has reached the age of 18 to 21, when they are adults, then the effect of the strict father is over, and presumably the child can take care of himself or not, and then they're out of the family. They have to they're gone. They have to go off on their own, take care of themselves, and if they can't take care of themselves, too bad. They're subject to the discipline of the world, right? They have, that's tough love, too bad. And after that, the father cannot meddle in the life of the child. The father can no longer tell the child what to do, because if the child is on his own and has his own sense of morality and has it right, he doesn't need to be told by the father. So the father is just meddling in his life. And otherwise, the father can't do much good anyway. So the father shouldn't meddle in the life of the child. Okay? That's the strict father model. Now, there's an interesting part of this model. It has a metaphorical version of capitalism built into it. And it's a very interesting thing. There's a fundamental metaphor of capitalism that goes like this. If everybody pursues their own profit, if everybody tries to make as much money as possible, then the profit of everybody will be maximized as of law of nature. That is, it's the best thing for everybody if everybody just makes as much money as they can. That is Adam Smith's law of the invisible hand. It says, by the invisible hand, which means nature, everybody will make the maximum amount of money they can if you just let everybody just make as much money as they can. Okay? Now, and that's the basis of free enterprise. Now, this metaphor has a version in the strict father model of the family. It is, if everybody seeks his own self-interest, then the self-interest of everyone will be maximized by the invisible hand, by nature. And that's why it's moral to pursue your self-interest. It says, if you're disciplined and you act morally, pursuing your self-interest, you can become wealthy and self-reliant. Okay? And theoreticians, conservative theoreticians, write about this. People who write about child rearing talk about the role of capitalism in a strict father family. It's a major thing. It's this notion of free enterprise enters into the family in this way. So, think about the politics that comes out when you map this onto a nation. Okay? In America, during the period of Roosevelt, after the Great Depression, Roosevelt brought the country out of the Depression by instituting what were called social programs. So, for example, they had a national program to build parks or make public buildings, to put people to work for the public good. Okay? They had a program called Social Security, where when you get paid, you put a certain amount of money aside into a government account, and when you retire, you at least get that much back. It means when you're old, you won't be impoverished. You'll have money back. Okay? That's called Social Security. There's Medicare, where if you pay a certain amount in, depending on your income, then when you're old and you retire, you can get free medical care. Okay? Those are social programs. Now, according to and also there are programs for people who are injured. So, for example, suppose that you're a quadriplegic and you're in a wheelchair. There are social programs paid for by the government to teach you how to get around, use artificial limbs, maybe learn a trade, get a job, whatever. Those are social programs. Or there might be social programs to give medical help to poor children who can't afford doctors. That's what a social program is. Now, according to the strict father model as applied to politics, social programs are immoral. because they give people things they have not earned. They give people things they have not earned and make them dependent. They take away discipline. And that's what makes them immoral. And so it is the goal of conservative politics to get rid of all government social programs, all of them. And now what about cutting taxes for the... Well, it turns out that the tax rate for the wealthy sort of goes up. If you are really, really wealthy, then it used to be that you paid a very high tax rate. I mean, if you were something like a billionaire and you made $1 billion a year, you might have to pay $500 million to the government to pay for social programs and keep $500 million. Okay? Poor billionaires. Now, that has been changed so that the billionaires now pay less, much, much less. And that has made America go into a deficit. America now has a deficit. And the reason is that George Bush cut the taxes on very wealthy people. And the reason he did that, one reason is that they're his friends. He himself is a very wealthy person, but also that way there's no money for social programs. And you get rid of them all at once. So America is now in the midst of having the conservatives slowly get rid of social programs, lots and lots of them. And the liberals are trying to stop that. Okay? Now, what does the strict father model say about foreign policy? Right? It says, well, America is like the father of the world, the most powerful nation. It is the moral authority of the family of nations, and the third world countries are like children, and they should just obey. Do you ask, does the strict father ask his children what he should do? No, he tells them what to do. Should the U.S. go to the United Nations and consult with all the nations of the world who are less powerful? No, that would be giving up sovereignty, giving up moral authority of the strict father. America should just decide what it's going to do and do it. All right? Decide what's right and do it and impose its moral vision on other people. That's what the conservatives want to do, and that's where you get the war in Iraq and so on. So that's a couple of things. There are hundreds of other consequences for politics for this. Now, what about the liberals? Here's what the nurturant parent family is. It's a very different kind of family. It assumes children are born good and should be made better. And it assumes that the world can be made better. And people should act to make the world better. And the job, and it assumes both parents are equal. They have equal responsibility. In addition, it assumes that the job of a parent is to nurture their children and to raise their children to nurture others. And nurturance means two things. Empathy, you care about someone else, you feel what other people feel, you connect to them. So a parent has to hear those cries and know what the cries mean. Okay? Empathy and responsibility. Now, a parent cannot be responsible if they're not taking care of themselves. They have to take care of themselves and also take care of their children. To be responsible, you have to be strong. It's not easy to raise a child. Any of you who've raised children will know this. Those of you who haven't may soon find out. Very hard to raise children. Now, so it requires responsibility. From empathy and responsibility, many things follow. First, if you empathize with a child, you want to protect the child. So protection is a moral value. You're morally obligated to protect that child. Secondly, fulfillment in life. In America, you want your children to have a happy, fulfilled life. And if you're going to do that, you yourself should have a happy, fulfilled life, because people who are unhappy don't want other people to be happier than they are. So it is part of the strict father family that everybody in the family should have happy, fulfilled lives, and that should be a goal of the family. Next, if you empathize with someone, a child, you want the child to be treated fairly. So fairness becomes a value. If you want the child to have a fulfilled life, the child must have enough freedom to do this. So freedom becomes a value. Now, there's not much freedom if there's no opportunity to make a living. So opportunity, allowing opportunity for as many people as possible, becomes a value. And there's no opportunity if you don't have prosperity, so building prosperity, building a good economy where everyone can prosper, no matter who they are, becomes a value. You can't do that unless you build community, unless people are cooperating in a community. So building communities and cooperation are a value. And you're not going to get cooperation in America unless people trust you. America works on trust. The entire country works on trust. And the only thing that makes it go, it makes American business go, and when there isn't trust, the whole thing collapses. But trust is required. And that's one of these values. And you don't trust someone unless they're honest. So honesty becomes a value. And you don't trust someone unless you can communicate with them and be able to talk back and forth. Open communication is a value. Those are the liberal values, and every liberal program that is proposed politically is an instance of one or more of those values. So in foreign policy, we want America to care about other people in the world, if you're a liberal, and to have global cooperation and consult with people and have treaties and use diplomacy rather than make war. Okay? In social policy, you want to help people who need help. Help people who are poor, who are impoverished, people who are injured, who are quadriplegics, people who can't afford an education, and so on. Those you want social programs. So you have two completely opposite views of politics in America that come out of these metaphors. Now, these are very deep. They're usually unconscious. I've written the book to try to make them conscious, but they're unconscious. And then, once you have these deep metaphors, they structure metaphors for every other area of life, for every other policy, for education, for how you should conduct a foreign policy, for how you should run an economy, and so on. And there are lots of other metaphors that go with this. For example, there's a metaphor about what are called free markets. It says a market is a force of nature, and that that under nature, people should freely just sell goods in any way they can. All right? That's a conservative metaphor. It fits the strict father model. It doesn't fit the nurture and parent model because it can hurt people. It isn't fair because what happens in a free market is the richer you are, the more you can control the market. And therefore you don't have a fair market. So liberals want fair markets in which wealthy corporations are limited in their ability to control the market. And conservatives want free markets allowing rich people to get as rich as they can be, because being wealthy is like being a good person. Okay? And so on. So, for example, I'll give you one nice linguistic example. What does this have to do with linguistics? On the day that George Bush took office, certain press releases started coming out of the White House. He has a writer named Karen Hughes, and it started using the term tax relief. He had a tax relief proposal which was to cut taxes for the rich. Okay? And he called this tax relief. Now, think about this from the point of view of metaphor and frame semantics. If you have the word relief, you are a cognitive linguist. You see the word relief. What does that tell you? There's a frame. In that frame, there is some affliction, something that hurts somebody. There's an afflicted party, somebody who is harmed by that affliction. Okay? So there's a hurt, and there's somebody being hurt by it. And there's a reliever who takes the harm or the affliction away. And he's a hero. And if someone else comes and tries to stop him, they're a villain, they're a bad guy, because they're keeping someone else from being relieved of this affliction. So that's what the word relief says. You add the word tax and you get a metaphor. Taxation is an affliction. It harms people. Right? Now you can see taxation in a different way as an investment in society, as helping people who need help and so on. But in this metaphor, taxation is an affliction. And so one of the things that Bush constantly talks about is tax relief, because that fits the strict father model. Okay? So tax relief is a metaphor, and it's a kind of surface metaphor, but the deep metaphor is that the nation is a family, a strict father family. That's the deep metaphor that governs all of the surface metaphors. Okay? So, the point of this is that politics and morality can be governed by deep metaphors that determine how you understand the world, how you understand every part of it. And then the surface metaphors fit on to the deep metaphors. The deep metaphors allow you to make sense of the others. Okay? And that's what's important. And in American politics, that's why liberals and conservatives can't understand each other when they talk past each other, because they have two utterly different deep metaphors. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.